I tell the associates, all of whom think you're completely removed from the reality of their world, that believe it or not, that commutes and that sort of thing were even an issue 27 years ago. So probably half the reason we started the firm is Ted Freeman lived in Sandy Springs, Bart Gary lived in East Cobb, I lived in Marietta, and we were all tired of driving to downtown every day. So when we decided to form a firm, we told the real estate brokers that we needed someplace equal distance between Ted's house and my house, which was the Galleria. So that honestly was a factor in sort of a change of life, to get out of downtown.
Welcome to the Founding Partner Podcast. Join your host, Jonathan Hawkins, as we explore the fascinating stories of successful law firm founders. We'll uncover their beginnings, triumph over challenges, and practice growth. Whether you aspire to launch your own firm, have an entrepreneurial spirit, or are just curious about the legal business, you're in the right place. Let's dive in.
Welcome to Founding Partner Podcast. I'm your host, Jonathan Hawkins. Today's guest, I've really been looking forward to. When I decided to launch this thing back in the fall, I made a list of potential guests, and this was someone who was one of the top people on my list. So glad to finally get Ben Mathis on here. And so Ben, we've known each other for quite a while. I think I first learned of you, when I got on your Georgia Tech football email list years ago. I always enjoyed getting that. So I don't know if you still send it. I'm not on there anymore. We'll have to add me back if you still do. So today's guest is Ben Mathis, Freeman Mathis Gary. It's a firm based here in Atlanta, but it's really grown a lot over the last number of years. We'll get into that. So it's really all over the country now. But the other interesting thing is I think this year, Freeman Mathis entered the AmLaw 200 for the first time. So I think that's a cool benchmark as well. But Ben, why don't you introduce yourself? Tell us about your background, your firm, and what you guys do.
Jonathan, thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. I always enjoy talking about the firm. We started 27 years ago on April Fool's Day, so unlike my anniversary and birthday and all the other things I'm forgetting in my advanced years, I can always remember when you start a law firm on April Fool's Day. And we started with 8 lawyers. And so we're a very different firm than we started off to be. And actually, we're exactly the opposite of the firm we ever wanted to be. And that's probably a story into itself, is how the world changed and we felt like we had to adapt. But we did start here in Atlanta. Ted Freeman, Bart Gary retired now. I still most days look around. It worries me because Ted and Bart always provided adult supervision. And now I look around and I'm one of the oldest people in the firm, and that terrifies me. But we are now a truly a national firm with a lot of thoughts and processes and strategies to be who we are. And there's been a lot to develop through the years. I'm a native Atlantan, and Atlanta's changed about as much as the firm has in all these years. And you and I are unusual, and then we're both Georgia Tech lawyers, or Georgia Tech undergrads who became lawyers.
There aren't that many of us, and a lot of the question I always got is, so you're a patent lawyer? No, I'm not.
I do, and my University of Georgia partners, who are many, all comment that they've got to work for the only law firm in existence where UGA grads get made fun of every single day in a law firm.
Very nice. So you started with 8 attorneys. Where are you guys now?
We are 380 lawyers, another almost 300 staff, including paralegals. And so that's around 680 head count. We think we'll cross over 400 lawyers in the early fall. We're in 21 states and 37 offices.
Wow, that's a lot of growth. Yeah. And I want to dig into some of that today. But let's go way back to the beginning. And when you started the firm, I guess you started with partners. What made you guys decide to do that as opposed to staying wherever you were?
I tell the associates, all of whom think you're completely removed from the reality of their world, that believe it or not, that commutes and that sort of thing were even an issue 27 years ago. Probably half the reason we started the firm is Ted Freeman lived in Sandy Springs, Bart Gary lived in East Cobb, I lived in Marietta, and we were all tired of driving to downtown every day. when we decided to form a firm, we told the real estate brokers that we needed someplace equal distance between Ted's house and my house, which was the Galleria. That honestly was a factor in the change of life to get out of downtown. But we did three different things. I was an employment lawyer, Bart was a construction lawyer, and Ted Freeman he had been a more traditional in the insurance world, but doing a lot of 1983 civil rights defense. I think it's probably fair to say that Ted is maybe the father of the civil rights defense bar in Georgia. And so we did those three things, and we thought there was a better fit and a different platform.
And you mentioned a minute ago that the firm now is very different than it was then. Obviously, it's much bigger, but is there anything else you were referring to?
Literally everything, with the exception that we still do a tremendous amount of employment law. We still do a tremendous amount of construction law and also in the government civil rights areas. As any lawyer knows, you can be in the biggest law firm in the world, or you can be by yourself. But when you have a lawsuit, it's you and your team against whomever's on the other side. And a lot of ways, it doesn't matter who you work for in that regard. But in every other respect, it's very different.
I remember, so I graduated law school in 2003, and I remember your firm. Back then, it seems to me like maybe you guys had in the teens, maybe in the 20s, lawyers. And I've been in a couple firms that were in that range, and they seemed to float there for a while. And it seems to me that you can grow organically to some level, but if you really want to grow, it's like a decision you make. Was it that way for you? And did there come a point where you guys decided, hey, we're gonna do it?
I tell people that we made two decisions. The first was when we started the firm, we made the decision that we would not resist growing. And I think a lot of small firms look at them and say life would be a lot easier not to grow. You can do pretty well financially. But one of the problems is your younger people do not have any opportunity for growth. And I think it just changes the whole feeling of your law firm. So Ted, Bart, and I were very deliberate about the fact we would not resist growing. And so from 1997 until really about 11 years ago, we grew nicely organically without trying. And then we made that conscious decision that you're talking about. And we saw, but in fact, it was 11 years ago, June 1st, because we just had an anniversary from the first group of lawyers who joined us from outside of Atlanta. So I'd go back 12, 13 years. We could see that the world that we were involved in was changing. We had a significant insurance-oriented practice. I've never described our firm as being an insurance defense firm because we've always been really heavily in the specialty fields. And employment law is a good example. When I started practicing employment law, there was no insurance in it. Now it's in it at many different levels, sometimes primary, but you can represent, and we do, Fortune 500 companies, but they've got backstop in there. And so you're in the insurance world, whether you mean to or not, but we were significantly in it. And we had seen the development of large corporate clients consolidating panel, but the insurance industry started doing that. And so in addition to maybe firms that are in the space we're in, like an Ogletree Deakins, that when I got out of law school was smaller than we were when we started, basically. And the Atlanta office had 8 lawyers because I was a summer clerk, I was a clerk there. And then Fisher and Phillips and people like that, and they saw the need to grow. And then when the insurance part of it hit, we had resisted that going out of state, but we saw we had to make a change if we wanted to be competitive nationally. And so we made that conscious decision. I've told people it was a very easy decision to make. It was very hard to execute.
Yeah, I want to get into that. So let's go back to your first sort of, I'll call it acquisition or merger or whatever that is. Was that in state or out of state?
It was out of state.
Okay.
And it was simply a small group of lawyers, 4 lawyers in San Francisco that we knew through some bar activities nationally. Really good group of employment lawyers. They were tired of being small. I'm not sure that adding us or joining together made them very big, but they had I sometimes call them pretend offices. I guess the proper term is virtual office in Los Angeles. So it was unstaffed, but they had business down there. It looked good on paper. We were Atlanta, Los Angeles, and San Francisco, and in 2 states. And then we, a few months later, added again 3 lawyers I knew in Philadelphia. They had one person in Tampa, an associate who worked with them. They had a virtual office across the river in Morristown in New Jersey. So again, the footprint looked really good. It was Atlanta, San Francisco, Los Angeles, Philadelphia, New Jersey, Florida, and it was a grand total of 8 lawyers beyond Atlanta. It was smoke and mirrors.
It looked good. The question I always have, a couple questions. One is, how did it come about? You knew the lawyers, but how did that discussion come about? Did they suggest it, you suggested, or was it just one night you were having a drink and you said, hey, this might be interesting? How does that conversation start?
Well, it started with a meeting at my house over the table in my great room with Ted, Bart, uh, Phil Savrin, Dana Main, sitting down and saying that and there was others are obviously, but we had maybe 10 partners in a 35 lawyer firm, and said, this has worked well. Ted and Bart are older than I am. They're in good shape. Their runway is not as long. I feel pretty good about where my practice is. We're in good spot, but I'm just not sure how this is going to work in the future for everybody else. And that not just the people in this room, but the people who work with us, that we've always been able to say you'll have a bright future if you do all the things you should do. And you were starting to see other national firms come in, plus some ferocious competition within Atlanta. People know this, but Atlanta is one of the 5 biggest legal markets in the United States. It's bigger than it punches above its weight, even though now we're obviously a top 10 city, but it's just, there's south of DC and arguably south of New York, there's not anything like Atlanta when it comes to the concentration of major firms here. And then you were seeing the California firms come in heavily, the New England or Northeastern firms come in. So that was the conversation, and everybody signed on to what we were going to do. So then you started thinking about who would you like to join and who would that be? And in that regard, it's just Julie Marquis is still with us today. And she was the one I noticed the other day because I remember she says my 11th anniversary. We were in New York last week, and she says our 11th anniversary. And I said, yeah, seems like yesterday that we were out there signing papers. But it was pretty informal in those days. I look back and laugh about how we used to do things. I still think we do things by gut and by handshakes more than maybe most large organizations, but today is nothing like the way it used to be. I think we actually, I joked about signing the papers. I think we signed the papers 6 months after we actually did it. That's how formal we were. So,
That doesn't sound too unusual based on a lot of lawyers and law firms I know. Some still don't have any agreements.
yes,
So
we do well in that litigation.
yeah, yeah. You guys, you've added a lot of offices since, but I want to figure out the more you add and the more locations you have, the more complex the organization is going to be, clearly. And so I'm sure every time you've added an office, you've learned from the last experience or all the ones before, so you get a little bit better at it. But take me through the learning process of bringing in sort of the new locations, and how does that all of a sudden work, going from one office, everybody here in Atlanta, to now all of a sudden you've got it distributed everywhere?
I'd say there were 3 phases of our learning, and I've talked to a lot of firms who've gone through this, and I'm always glad to share that. The first part is when you have absolutely no idea what you're doing, and we specialized in that for the first 2 or 3 years. You knew what you were trying to do, you had no idea how to do it. You're also, as you do it, you're trying to keep the same structure and staff, but you're scared to death to spend money. And all these truisms are true, is that you've got to invest, you've got to have the infrastructure in place to be able to successfully assimilate. We didn't do that very well the first 2 or 3 years. Fortunately, people stuck with us. I think they were young and excited, and a certain amount of chaos was okay. But we eventually got pretty good at it through a lot of trial and error. I used to tell people that we learned about multi-state operations and the tax implications by getting ding notices from the city of San Francisco over taxes I'd never heard of and never dreamed existed until they sent us something saying we hadn't paid them. And anyway, after 2 or 3 years, I realized we needed stronger professional management. And we did that. And I look at today, we have such a tremendous administrative team. And people say that, but our COO, Chuck Freeman, came from Holland and Knight, was a business advisor of a litigation group, which has 10 times as many lawyers as we'll ever dream of. Derek Singleton was CFO for a large medical company. And then you just go through IT, HR, all those areas, really good. And so now we're on the back office, the most boring thing in the world, but is the most important part of it, billing and collections, having the technology, the systems in place, and then the people. I was looking, I get a headcount report every week. We have 115 people in non-staff, not legal secretaries, not paralegals, 115 people out of an organization of total headcount of saying 680. That's a lot. We ran 40 lawyers on an office manager and a part-time bookkeeper. And now I have 380 lawyers. Do the math. It takes a lot more, but that's what makes it successful. So it took us a while to learn to do that, and then to make sure you developed and are very disciplined about your culture components, your process, your procedure, all the things about running a large organization. And when you get to, I'd say 7,500 lawyers, at that point, you better start to have all those things in place. It's just the scale from there. And you got to get that structure in place to be able to scale it up. And so I tell people now, we could be 2, 3, 4 times as big. I'm not sure the structure would be any different. We just have 2, 3, 4 times as many people within that structure.
So the administrative team you've got, I assume they're mostly, maybe all, not lawyers. They're more professional executive types.
Yes, and then the other component of that I think law firms have been slow to realize, the really large firms know this, but I'm saying the mid-sized firms, 100 lawyers to 600, we now have 4 really important non-practicing lawyers who have significant roles. We have somebody who runs our rates and also our legal operations, he came largely out of the insurance world, but was in private practice, was partnered with a large national firm. He runs that whole area. So he's a lawyer. He understands the world. He also understands the importance of billing and collecting money and the technology in there. We have a partner who works with our practice group leaders, has a strong business background, but was a partner with a large law firm in Florida. He works very closely with our practice group leaders to give them that business component to looking at client quality, talent development, the structure and operation of it. And then we have a whole insurance program that works with very large clients in terms of managing their portfolio of claims and litigation that cuts across product lines. When you're dealing with a client who you've got cyber cases for, employment cases, construction, catastrophic loss, all being handled by different partners in the firm, they're busy. They can be very disconnected from looking at the overall complexion and success of the litigation. Alana Croteau works very closely with a lot of key clients in that respect. And those are things we never dreamed we would need, but they're differentiators.
Yeah, a lot of lawyers are scared or too proud. I don't know what it is, but the thought of bringing in non-lawyers to come help run the business is just the last thing that they would do. And you're all in. Did it take a while to get there? And then how big were you when you thought, hey, it starts to make sense to bring in some outside executive type level help?
Probably when we hit about 150 lawyers. So I would say we passed 100 10 years ago. That year, we got right at 100. Yeah, about that time, we saw that there was a real need. It started to change my role, and that was a big part of it too. But believe me, I sympathize with the law firms that have a really good office manager, and then somebody comes in and says, you need to pay somebody to run your operation. You pay a partner, and you're thinking, this is insanity. But then at some point you realize the insanity is not doing it.
It's not cheap. I've always thought, referring back to Georgia Tech, go get a really smart industrial engineer come running operations of a law firm. They would know some of the technology. They would know how to run efficiently. I think they could do a really good job.
I can't remember your major, Jonathan, but I was industrial management. And Ted and Bart always let me run the firm. They were not that interested in that part of it. I prided myself on being a really good business person. Lawyers make fun of how bad at business people we are, like doctors. And I thought, I'm really good at this. And I realized I didn't know anything as we got into this. I learned a lot from our first really outside professional manager. And so I've been the one on the learning curve the last 10, 11 years.
So you guys are still in big time growth mode. I think you opened 4 new offices last year. Sounds like maybe you're going to open some more, or at least add some more people this year. So with all of that growth and with pretty fast growth, I'm curious how you keep the firm culture together. How do you bring into the fold the new offices, the new attorneys?
We spend a lot of time in making sure we do this. We defined our culture several years ago as core culture components, and they're different than core values. They're the components of what the people and how you are operating your organization. So ours are teamwork, excellence, opportunity, and consistency, which I think are very different than when people talk about culture. I always say lawyers are the greatest people in the world. They are entertaining, they're fun, they're smart as hell. And like any place, when you send your lawyers out to events and stuff, if you're not careful, they'll all start talking to lawyers and not to the clients. And but law firms are very different, and it's not because they're not good people in there; they're because of the aspects of the way the firms operate. So teamwork is huge. I've never run into a law firm yet that said we don't operate as a team. We're just a bunch of selfish individuals. But the reality is a lot of firms can operate like that. The truth is partners can wind up competing against each other for business. And so I think you have to guard against that. And we have a wonderful culture that our partners believe that working together, they will do better than working for themselves. And so the biggest insult you can get in our law firm, we have really good lawyers, good people. That's usually never an issue. The biggest insult is when they say you're operating like a silo. It is a 4-letter here. And so we guard that culture zealously. And occasionally we have people who come, they say they want to be part of a team. What they really want to do is they just want to be part of a large organization that has a lot of resources, and they want to be left alone, do what they want to do the way they want to do it. And they'll call you if they need anything. And those people do not last. That's the foundation we build a lot on. Excellence is, you got to be a good lawyer here. I think some organizations, if somebody's got a lot of business, they tolerate a lot because they've got some financial contributions. We just fortunately, that you'll stand out here a lot. And part of that excellence is it's a hardworking place. I don't think we're a sweatshop, but I used to tell people I was the only, once I stopped practicing, I was the only worthless lawyer in the firm. Everybody else worked full time. Now I got 2 or 3 other worthless partners, as I was describing, but they contribute in their own way. But what we don't have is somebody who bills 100 hours a year, has a lot of business, plays a ton of golf. That's wonderful. It's wonderful for a lot of places. It would wreck our culture. We consider that part of excellence is work ethic, opportunity. People are attracted here because we're growing and we're committed to growth. And we're not just trying to grow, but I think that provides it gives people a purpose in what they're doing other than just purely the practice of law, because they have an opportunity to grow their practice, improve their practice, and I think that comes with professional and financial success, which people appreciate. And then the last I always say is the most boring part, which is consistency. And that probably gets into orientation, onboarding, all the things we do to try and make sure that we are consistent in how we deliver our legal product across all markets and all product lines. And so we do a lot of things there to try and drive that consistency. And I tell people that leads to the opportunity. When we can tell a national client they like what we do in Los Angeles, that they're going to get the same kind of approach in Atlanta, and not just somebody said, we got a good lawyer there. He'll practice completely differently, Go at things. You'll get a good result, but it might as well be two different law firms. I think a lot of law firms struggle with that, and we put a lot of emphasis into making sure that consistency is there. And that's part of what I mentioned, the FMG assurance program, and we're serious about it. So those things have helped keep, I say, culture in the terms of day-to-day practice of law. As far as the other parts, we have very different people, very diverse. San Francisco is quite different than Lexington, Kentucky. But it's funny, when you get around the lawyers, other than the accents, you'd have a hard time telling where they're from because there's a lot of consistency in how they handle themselves, their approach to law, that sort of thing.
Real quick, thanks for listening. If you're getting any value out of this podcast, please take 2 seconds to hit the subscribe button and leave a 5-star review. It would really mean a lot to me. Now back to the show. So how do you encourage the lawyers from all the different offices to get to know each other, interact? I assume you have some sort of annual retreat at least once a year or something. How do you go about doing that?
We do. We have a partners retreats coming up in Dallas. Everybody's looking forward to it. I think in that regard, it's nice, but it's not of any value. The way we believe we keep people interconnected between offices is through our practice groups. We have 13 national practice sections. And we're very deliberate about creating a national practice section. We do so when we have a critical mass of partners who exclusively or predominantly practice in that area. Those 13 practice sections have leadership, they have their groups, email lists, they meet once to twice a month. And as the entire group, they meet more frequently as far as key partners. So that has worked really well for us. And as a litigation firm, and that's what we are, that allows people to really feel connected across offices. My greatest satisfaction is when I hear somebody and they're introducing themselves and they say, I'm with FMG. They say, I'm an employment lawyer. And that's what I do. And it takes a couple of questions before they say, oh, I happen to be in Los Angeles. They think of themselves first and foremost in these practice sections. And that has been really important. And the firms and the people who joined us have all commented that I think we deliver in that regard, so that they don't feel like they're operating as an island, as an office where it's nice to say you're part of a big firm, but you're really just 20 lawyers in Newark.
So I want to shift a little bit. As part of your journey of growth, everybody, everywhere in America, maybe everywhere in the world, hit this gigantic roadblock in 2020 called COVID. How did that affect your trajectory and just how you ran the firm? You said you were a litigation firm. Courts shut down a lot of places. How did you guys handle that?
I still have the emails to our CFO where I said March 15th, I said, give me projections if we have no revenue in August and September, like zero. How long can we operate? That sort of thing. But we were very fortunate. I think a lot of people in our space, you saw some impact, but the plaintiffs bar, I'll give them credit. They're like kudzu. You can't kill them. They kept going. And we grew during the pandemic. Believe me, I read about these employee tax credits and firms making a ton of money. We grew our head count. There's no, we've looked at 100 different ways we cannot qualify. And I see these firms taking $1 million credits, and we were morons to keep growing. We probably would have done better financially to have stayed put. But we did a lot of things. We shut down like a lot of firms, but we were fortunate. Our technology was good. We were able to convert. I think in some ways it brought the whole firm together. We have a monthly call for an hour that's not very businesslike. We go by offices. You get a lot of weather reports, birthdays, stuff like that. We went to daily calls just you didn't know if people were alive, and because everybody went home remote. And so in that sense, it brought us together. We were different than I think most firms. I made a decision that we would reopen offices as soon as you were legally able to reopen. So we reopened Atlanta in May. I remember having to cajole some partners because I said, you can't expect anybody else to come back if you're not back. And so we got back on our feet pretty quickly. Now, it was different. We had a lot of people obviously remote. hybrid. Our world has changed in that regard. But we never had to fight the battle of a lot of firms of having to get their people to come back. But we never laid anybody off. We never cut a paycheck, not one penny. And so people appreciated that. So they were okay with our philosophy of getting back. And so it was a terrible time, obviously, but as a firm and in terms of what we were doing, it didn't affect us in that sense. We opened 2 offices during the pandemic.
Wow.
2 offices while we were really, I'll give you an example. We opened Cherry Hill on, I think it was March 12 in the morning and closed it that afternoon with the group Jack Shea and Bill Meade, a group of lawyers. And we did the deal and opened Newark. Paul Pantino is our office chair there. I never met Paul in person. He became an equity partner, chair of an office, and without ever meeting him in person. Now, he had known a couple of our partners from a prior firm. They were together. When I first met Paul 6 months later, I felt like I knew him. I had a million Zoom calls, but can you imagine telling somebody 10 years ago you would do that when never meeting the key partner in person? You wouldn't dream of it. We did a lot of things that we got through.
Yeah, that's amazing. And the other thing, there's a huge debate. I guess I don't hear about it as much, but the virtual versus in office, very strong opinions on both sides. I'm more in office. The intangible benefits that you get from being in an office, I just think you cannot put a price on them. And people argue with me on that. And part of it is, look, I have friends that I worked with 2 firms ago, and we were in the office going to lunch and grabbing coffee every day. And we still refer each other cases. If we were virtual, we'd be friends, but I'm not sure we'd be as close of friends. And it's the camaraderie, that kind of thing, that I think it's going to serve the younger lawyers better to actually be in the office. And this is not an old school versus new school kind of thing. I just think long term, they'll be better served by being in an office somewhere. I don't know. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I have, believe me, I was laughing. We started a law firm because I got tired of commutes, or arguably. I came in every day, and we only had 4 people here. We had 40,000 square feet and 4 people. I got more done. It was peace and quiet. I was almost, part of me didn't want anybody to come back. The only time Jonathan, you love this, the only time I went out is our youngest daughter was exposed. And so under our protocol, I had to be out for 5 days. I did, and I was at home, and I'm not a work at home guy at all. I come in on the weekend. I just been in the office. And by Thursday or Friday, I thought, when I walked the dog during the day, I told my wife, I said, the neighbors down, I said, they're terrific people. I was talking to them, and she said they've been there for 15 years. So I thought, well, I never met them. Who's home at noon on a Wednesday? And by Sunday, I was thinking maybe I should stay out a few more days. This has been pretty good. I've enjoyed this. But so I understand it. However, to get to your point, it were my sibling or child, especially a younger one in the practice of law. Maybe there are areas, yes, but if you're in litigation, and I'm worried about in some of our markets like California, where depositions are still by video in many instances. So it's hard enough, and we spend a lot of time trying to get young lawyers in positions to get on their feet. So think about this. You not only haven't tried a case, you haven't been to court. Now you're talking about somebody maybe hasn't been in a conference room to take a deposition in person. Is that the lawyer you want representing you in 10, 15 years? It's to me, it's just ludicrous. It's a surgeon who's never been in the operating room. It's impossible. I was saying we were in New York last week. I was with a client. They had a couple of the younger people in the room as we were talking about their litigation. And this is a woman who's a tremendous mentor. And several times while she was talking, she'd stop and she'd explain to the younger people the context and why this is important. And I thought they learned a lot in an hour meeting that they would never get by Zoom or in a Teams meeting. And so, yeah, I think it's a real problem going forward. Now, that doesn't mean they have to be here every day. The biggest challenge we see is our partners are the ones who really don't need to be here every day. They don't need, they've learned.
Yeah.
But if they're not here, how can you expect the associates to be, or the younger people, and how can you expect them to learn? So it's a challenge. I understand everybody's position on it, but our position is you need to be in the office. You're a professional. You're expected to be in the office. during regular business hours unless you have another arrangement. And we have a lot of people who have that. But what I don't expect is people to go hybrid without telling us and just not come in on Mondays and Fridays and just not tell anyone. I don't think that's appropriate.
Yeah, so I want to shift a little bit and talk a little bit about your growth and your acquisition. And feel free to not tell me. I'm not looking for your secret sauce here, but I'm curious about your approach to acquisition. So you've made the decision to grow and you are growing. So how do you identify acquisition targets? What sorts of things? And there's really probably two sides to this coin. Number one, you're looking for people that you think would fit, and so you want to go find them. But then also, when you find them, you're going to have to explain to them why it might make sense to come to your firm.
Before I answer that, let me back up one thing I do think is important and for people growing their firms. One thing we did was in terms of growth is, again, plan and set out our growth strategy. One of it is, for a while, we called it a 20% growth target each year, and we measure it by attorney headcount. Now, and I learned this, is that's more of a check than a target, because I realized the years we grew more than 20%, we tended to outgrow our infrastructure and we had problems. And unless you have a large group in a merger, I think it's really good to think about what's too big too fast, because that can hurt you quicker than any problem. So we learned a lot with that. Our growth strategy is threefold, which is, and I'll get to the new markets, but it's organic growth. And we believe in our first year program. We have 34 first years starting in September. Looking at all our markets and saying, where do we need lawyers in various of our national practice group? We don't have an employment lawyer in Vegas. And so we need to recruit and look for an employment partner there. And the third part, to get to your question, is new markets. And yeah, we look at a lot of peer firms, and there's a lot of opportunity in there. Maybe somebody's buried on the depth chart and would like a chance to really lead a practice section. So we look there. We look at a lot of mid-size or smaller firms and honestly, a lot of those firms have really good leadership. They've got big gaps because all these issues about talent recruitment, and they don't have a great successorship plan. And so we're able to, so when we talk about the value added, many of them have young people or staff people they're very loyal to. They may have a 5-10 year runway, and there's like, how in the world is this going to continue after me? So we're able to come in and say, we take that issue off the plate for you. And they're very amenable to that. That's attractive to a lot of people. And then there's just the value of being with a larger platform that, they get rid of some headaches administratively. They got a chance to grow and enhance their practice. And most people like that idea. Their biggest fear is loss of independence and all the things that go with that. And that's our job to explain what the real world is going to be like. And we've been fortunate that the people who've joined us, only a couple of instances really have been really pleased. And they're our best advocates. When I have somebody who's got a 20 lawyer firm and they're worried, I say, go talk to Kevin Norkey, go talk to Barry Miller. They ran firms, ran groups. So they'll tell you, and they'll be honest about the good and bad. So that's really how we go at it.
I would imagine there are a lot of opportunities, acquisition opportunities out there with just the aging of lawyers and the lack of viable succession plans in place. So I would imagine that it's sort of a target-rich environment for you. The other thing I know, though, is most people, maybe it's all people, but a lot of lawyers are just, inertia is a powerful force. And it's just, you can't get them, they hate where they are, but you can't get them to make a decision and actually do anything about it. How long does it take? You think you found somebody, you start talking. How long do these things usually take to actually get it across the finish line?
Some have taken 2+ years, but some have taken 30 days, literally. So you do try and find people. And as you do this enough, you get a feel for how serious they are, where they are in their decision-making process. Most people who you would be interested in have already been approached. And so they've been through this process a little bit, and they know what they're looking for, and we know what we're looking for. So, but in some instances, the timing's not right. Right now, for larger groups, This is the time of year we are spending a lot of time having those conversations. We like those situations to happen at the very first of the year. The structure of these deals can vary, but if most law firms like us run a calendar year basis, and I think the managing partners and equity partners out there can appreciate when people say, "What's your time frame for return?" I said, "Our partners will invest whatever it takes, as long as they get all their money back by December 31st of every year." So you gotta, if you don't want to have debt, we have no debt. So you gotta, the sooner you start on January 1st, the better, to get a full
Yeah.
year's revenue. Because otherwise you get 8, 9 months of expenses and 4 months of revenue, and most margins are not that broad to cover that loss.
Yeah, I guess that was one question is how do you finance the acquisitions? I guess it's no debt. You're
Yeah.
got a deal where they get paid out of cash flow or whatever.
I tell people they're not. They use the term acquisition until private equity or non-lawyer owners are allowed in the law firm space. I don't know many law firms that quote get bought. Maybe there are, but we don't buy firms. What we do is we'll structure it typically a couple different ways. But if it's ongoing firm, then it's going to be a merger. They bring their WIP, they bring their AR, and I tell people that typically in year one, you're basically trying to replicate what you have in a different platform. A lot of times we can bring some cost savings, but they're not tremendous amounts of cost savings with a smaller firm because usually they're pretty good at squeezing every dollar out of their practice. And a lot of times it comes through not investing in technology and all the things that really cost money. They're pretty profitable for whatever their practice is. And it takes a while to grow that or change the rate structure and all that. You're trying to replicate it in year one, so you typically need the WIP and AR as an ongoing entity. Now, lawyers who join you or a group and they're leaving another firm can't bring WIP and AR and their cash flow with them. So you got to be very careful about what time of year you do that and make sure you're doing accurate projections. It's hard this time of year to bring a lawyer on and not lose money. What are we, June? I'd say by August 1st, it's very difficult to bring a lawyer or a group on and not lose money by January or December 31st. I mean, just think about it. If they come August 7th, you're lucky to get the bills out in mid September. You're lucky to get them paid by October. So you're talking about 2.5 months of revenue and what is that, 5 months of expenses.
Yeah, and then there's probably there's an onboarding cost too.
Oh
The
yeah.
cost of all the files, all the technology, get them up to speed, probably a ton as well.
Probably like most firms, we have I'll joke and say a secret set of books. When we make the billing projections, we have what their billing expectation is when they hit the door. We have what we know it's probably going to be, which is less because there's a lot of transition. And so
Yeah.
very, very few lawyers have a typical month their first 2 months.
That's what I've always heard. I've got $1 million book that's coming with me. All right, it's really more like a $500,000 book.
You never know. You never know. But even if it's a million, again, the timing, transition, billing cycle, all those things, collection cycle, all that changes.
So you're out there, you've found a potential target, you're going through the due diligence process or the dance, whatever you want to call it. Have you, over the years, discerned certain red flags that stand out and say, okay, yeah, maybe this is not going to work? And any advice on that? Sort of what are the potential pitfalls that cause you to say, wait a second?
Is if your components you're looking at are teamwork, excellence, opportunity, and consistency, you need to ask yourself, how do these folks stack up in that regard? I think I shouldn't get into too much detail, but I'll just say it's easy to make misses when you know somebody only in a social sense or as friends or as maybe at bar association meetings or all that or quote by reputation. And you haven't really drilled down and taken a look at if it's teamwork, what's their existing operation like? Have they lost all their people? If people quit left and right, that may tell you something. I am reminded that one of my father's best friends in life, and I was a young guy, and I told him one time, I won't say who, I said, Mr. So-and-so, I said, hey, he seems like a nice guy, but I heard these other people talking. He said, son, he said, He is one of my best friends in life, but he is a SOB to work for. And that stuck with me all these years. He was an Auburn guy. That explains it. But I say that funny. I love Auburn. But anyway, you get the point. That's what you've got to look at. You've got to do your due diligence in a business fashion, looking at what the issues are that are important to your firm that you think makes a success, and screen out the noise, which can be a lot of good noise, and make a business decision that you think makes sense.
So you get past all that, they come on board, they're there. Have you guys designed a program on how to bring them into the fold and really integrate them into the firm? And how is that, what do you do, and how has that maybe changed over the years?
Oh yeah, we just had a group in Miami join us, and we sent down a team. They've been down there this week's first week, and it's not just lawyers. Our administrative team is there. The HR team is there working with staff, the IT team, the part of our assurance group, so that they are committed to our processes and procedures. They get trained on it, but then they're people hands on. And you don't just hire somebody and change the sign and send a bunch of training videos, which honestly, the first couple of years is how we did it too often because we were busy and we just didn't have the staff and the time to do it. So they have a whole process on how they do it, hands-on, in-person, real-time training, and then we have follow-up on it. I think we have people all say they have these kinds of things. It's all about the execution, which is we have a really strong mentorship program. We have partner mentors for new partners. And if you've been practicing 25 years, you probably don't need a mentor, but you probably need a mentor for the firm you're joining. And that's what we focus on. So, and all of that has been really successful. But again, I think everybody knows all these things. It's being willing to invest the staff and the money to be able to institutionalize and replicate it on a consistent basis. Because otherwise, you have the greatest program in the world, but if you don't have time to do it again and again, you don't get consistency.
And that sounds like something you've learned through experience. You have to go through it. You knew it conceptually, but you just had to go through it. And now you guys have the program down.
That's what I mean is that if I were, how old was I when we started the firm? Whatever, I was 35 years old, and you hear this, the thing I would do is make sure I went and hired people who've been through this and on that professional staff side, because like most things, until you've done it, it doesn't translate quite the way. So you could tell people all this, but having somebody, our HR team, for instance, who, when we brought Mike Luke in, who had worked for a company with 3,000 employees, understood onboarding, understood a merger and all that was involved in that in terms of people, understood how people get upset about benefits when they're different, and being responsive and sympathetic to that and addressing that head on. So they're at work the next day and happy and excited and not aggravated because the pediatrician is no longer on the list. And all these things that trip you up when you're dealing with people.
That's such a good little anecdote there. It's the little things that you don't, the unknown unknowns almost, that are there, and you have to just go through it and get tripped up once. You're never going to get tripped up on that again.
It's like our partnership agreement. When I tell people, when they look at it, I said, most every provision in there is because somebody did something really dumb. And so we had to add something in there. That's how we learn. We learn through trial and error. But again, I could have avoided that if I had been a better manager 15 years ago and had hired people and really thought more about where we were headed to get people who had that experience.
That's a good segue. I want to explore your day to day, your current role at the firm, and maybe how that's changed over the years, both in terms of the administrative stuff you do, whatever that is, and how involved are you in actual legal work nowadays, and how that's evolved over time.
I tell people too often, I'll say I stopped practicing day to day 2 or 3 years ago, and I was talking with a friend I've known probably a little bit less than 10 years, and I was able to peg. I said, I think when I first met you is the last time I took a deposition, so that would have been over 8 years ago. So I really, after the biggest and the real change was when we added the Gilbert Kelly firm in California and another group that popped us over 100, which was 10 years ago. That's when I realized I was within a year or two, But I thought I was a pretty good lawyer. I thought I was a pretty good business person. I wasn't very good at either one if I wasn't careful. And that's hard, I think, for first generation law firms. I was in a situation where I could stop practicing, and if it all fell apart, I thought I could pick my practice up and make a living. I understand that's hard for a lot of people to be in that position. But fortunately, I was in the right sort of spot in my career. But yeah, at that point, I never understood how you could fill your day up. I thought these people, that'd be great. I could work out and play golf all day. These guys that don't practice, what in the world can they do? But pretty quickly, I learned to define my job now. So I look at several things that fill my time up. In our growth mode, lateral recruiting in terms of partners and other firms, I try and spend time. I can't spend a lot of time with every lateral partner we bring in, but obviously every group I do. And I wish I knew the entire firm as well as I know our partners, but I know our partners pretty well. They say we need such and such. I usually can say, I think this is probably the right person. I spend time and that helps me when they come in because I've already known them. So the lateral recruiting, I don't know that I need to, but I guess I can't get away from clients. I spend a lot of time dealing with clients, just touching base. How are we doing? Relationships. It's part of what makes the job fun. And then I look on the management side, spending time with our practice group leaders. I won't say manage them, but working with them and understanding what their needs are, trying to address those. And then obviously a lot out with our executive management, with Chuck and Derek, our CFO, and COO, and the whole team there, depending on what their needs are, understanding how we're delivering there. The other part, though, that is most important, I know about you, Jonathan. I've started following Instagram. Probably the only thing about our former head coach, whose name will never be mentioned, but when he got all into social media, I'm not a Facebook guy or anything like that. I stay on LinkedIn, but I started following Instagram to keep up with recruiting and some of the stuff we're doing. So I still am on Instagram. And I guess it's a sad testament to my life that somehow people get all this exciting, inappropriate stuff. I get Warren Buffett somehow. So I have got a tremendous number of Warren Buffett feeds constantly. And I was struck by one where he was talking with Bill Gates, and Bill said, "What?" Gates said, did I learn from Warren?" He said, "We had a meeting we were trying to schedule. I looked at my calendar, and I was like, I've got Wednesday 7 weeks from now between 3 o'clock and 3:15 open." And he said, and Warren pulls out this paper calendar, and it's just pages of blank. And he looked over and he said, "Bill, you need to learn how to say no." And because Warren Buffett spends a lot of time thinking and dealing in that regard. And I think there's a lot to that. So I try and make sure I have time, and I divide it this way for strategic thinking. And I try and look a month ahead, 6 months ahead, and then the year after, and where we're going and what we need to do. So we're looking ahead constantly. And I try and spend more on that 6 months ahead, because what's going to happen next month, unless it's a crisis, I can't do a lot about probably. But 6 months ahead, you can impact where your organization is going, especially a year ahead. That strategic part, I probably don't spend enough time on, but it should be more than it is in what I do every day.
You've been real gracious with your time. Before we go, I want to shift again, and I've got to ask you, we got to talk some Georgia Tech football or basketball, whatever. The landscape of college football has changed a lot. We're getting over the coach that won't be named. But as you look out, what are you thinking? How's the team going to be?
I am more involved in it than in some ways, I'd like to be. I'm pretty involved in our NIL program. And I think, like a lot of people, you have a lot of qualms about the way that world is going. I think I can say this without spilling any beans. I said when our NIL group is together, the first few minutes, people talk about this is not exactly what we ever dreamed we'd be doing. There's a lot of discomfort, and then somebody says, "Do you ever want to beat Georgia again?" Everybody says, "Yeah," and then we get to business. So I saw the other day that Brent Key made some comments about our friends over in Athens about how he feels. And so I think we've got the right guy on a lot of different levels. So I was with a meeting the other day. I think we got a team that's going to win some games next year. I think we got a top 10 offense, and defense is going to improve. So hopefully we can make that game in Athens more exciting than it's been the last few years. So I'm very excited about that. Stottlemyre's terrific. I think we've got Jay Batt comes back to leadership. We've got a great AD who understands all of this. We have a terrific leadership. I'm excited. I'm more excited about Georgia Tech athletics than I have been in a long, long time.
Well,
So
that's
for the Tech
encouraging.
fans out there, I think there's hope is on the way.
That's encouraging. The other topic that I don't really follow and haven't followed, but the sort of the conference realignment issue. We've got people suing to get out of the ACC. You've got some of these West Coast teams that were left basically alone. Everybody left. Any predictions or any thoughts on realignment?
I don't have any inside knowledge on that, and then more than anybody else has. I think it's going to change. And this is public knowledge, there's a settlement with the NCAA that supposedly the schools would be able to first year put $20 million directly into paying players, either through the collectives one way or the other, but it's coming from the school. So that may change the NIL collective situation. So no, you hear the term everyday Wild West, which is, I think, where college athletics is. But in the end, the money, right or wrong, makes a huge difference. I think a real power coming is SMU in the ACC because they've got financial resources that are pretty impressive. I don't know if you have time to. I thought it was a hysterical story. The headline, which explained it, was it's only a couple $100 million. I'm not going to lose sleep over it. And it was when SMU went in the ACC, I read the article like everybody else. I thought they're not taking any television revenue. And I thought, why do they want to be in the ACC? Their board and their chair, who's a former SMU football player, has made it a mission for years to get SMU back into a power conference. They thought they had it with Pac-12. That fell apart. So SMU took no TV money. So that board of trustees at SMU apparently has 7 or 8 billionaires, and they literally went around the room and said that gap in the TV money could be 30, 40, $50 million a year. And the guy said, we're not talking about $1 million a year. We're talking about several who's in. And they went around the room and they all said, we'll do what it takes. And so then he walked out, and that's when he made the statement. He said, it's a couple $100 million a year. I'm not going to lose sleep over it.
Yeah.
And that's the kind of support SMU has.
I've always said one of these Georgia Tech billionaire alums should just say, all right, I'm going to take Tech under my wing as like my private sort of professional team and just open the checkbook. But no one's done it yet.
They're all too smart.
There's got to be a way to structure it as a tax write-off. At least you're doing something fun.
There's nothing deductible about NIL, I'll tell you that. So.
Yeah, good to know. Good. I appreciate you coming on. So before we let you go, tell us how people can find you if they want to, and then also if you want to make a pitch, if there's any types of lawyers or practices would be willing to bring on or talk to, maybe you can talk about that too.
Sure. First of all, I'm pretty easy to find. Go to our internet. I'm not somebody who hides. One of the things we insist on is everybody in our law firm on their email signature and their business card, who uses business cards anymore, has their cell phone. So I am not a hard guy to find. One of the lawyers in Miami was kicking back on that, and I get that every once in a while. I said, we're in the service business. You don't like who calls you? They have this cool thing called caller ID. So I'm easy to find. I only have one email, so that's easy too. As far as pitches, if you're a good lawyer, you like to try cases, you're in litigation, we probably have a spot for you, literally anywhere. We didn't really talk about the shortage of talent, but there is just a shortage of talent out there. There's a shortage of lawyers who want to try cases or be in really tough litigation. I think the law schools are having a lot of kids come out who I had to miss my 43 reunion because of an illness in our family. But when I was thinking about this 40 years ago when I was in law school, everybody had seen To Kill a Mockingbird. Everybody wanted to be a trial lawyer. And it's no knock, but now you have lots of graduates who have no interest in litigation. And so that pool you're drawing from is smaller and smaller of people who really are committed to doing that. If you think you're a good litigator and you really also want to get in a position with a firm that likes to try cases, is capable of it. We talk about our trial culture within the firm. Give me a call. I don't care where you are in the country. We'll find a place for you.
And your firm's in growth mode still. So
yes,
that's important.
Absolutely.
Well, thanks,
Sorry
Ben.
for the headache with you having to switch offices. I had no idea they were going to tear my windows apart when we started. For those who are watching and noticed, I'm in a different office from when I started. So I had to come to an interior office.
I appreciate it, Ben. Thanks again for being flexible on that and staying with me.
All right. Thanks so much, Jonathan. I enjoyed it.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Founding Partner Podcast. Be sure to subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts to stay up to date on the latest episodes. You can also connect with Jonathan on LinkedIn and check out the show notes with links to resources mentioned throughout our discussion by visiting www.yourlawfirmgc.com. We'll see you next time for more origin stories and insights from successful law firm founders.